Humans are forgetful. We need constant reminders. If you think through the Old Testament, God was always calling them to memorialize certain experiences that they had with God, to build an altar or, to remember a certain particular action or moment in time. And so we would, this is what Passover was essentially, right? We are constantly looking for opportunities to remember the things of God, the promises of God, the acts of God in our lives. And so humans are forgetful, and the power of symbolism is helpful to the weak minds of men. And again, we need memorialization in the Christian life to help us remember what promises God has given to us. We need those visual symbols to retain those spiritual truths. And this is why God gave us things like the Lord's Supper and baptism, head coverings, marriage. These are physical actions that remind the church and teach the world something that's true about God and his plan for his people. They're not just arbitrary practices that have no intention or meaning. No, they're very important practices that teach the world or remind the church of vital truths regarding the gospel or regarding order within the church and the family, or God's design for humanity or for righteousness' sake, whatever it may be. And when you pervert, distort, or destroy the symbols, they lose their power to inform. And that's why it's so important that we maintain the integrity of what marriage is. It's also why I argue in my book, A Cover for Glory, the argument of head coverings, because head coverings are essentially the visual symbol representing the spiritual truth of the doctrine of headship, right? You have head symbols for a doctrine on headship. And when you lose the symbols, you start to lose the doctrine of headship. And this is why the feministic era that we have been raised in and been saturated with has lost its understanding of the reason for head coverings, and we've become an egalitarian society at large, and especially we have been influenced in the church by that. And when you remove the symbols of station and authority, the visual symbols like a head covering, you also begin to forget the qualifications for leadership. And so we're starting to see greater ordination of women because, hey, if we're essentially the same and there's no visual symbol there to remind us of our differences that are according to the Word of God and our station and authorities and roles and being, how we're different, then why can't women be pastors and why can't women preach? And, we're essentially the same, right? And so again, when we remove the symbols, we forget the truths that we are supposed to remember or be reminded by those practices. And so essentially, this is why we must fight at every level to protect the definition of marriage, gender, family, sexuality. They each are contributing pictures or prompts that uphold God's plan for fruitfulness and faithfulness and righteousness. Secondly, marriage is not just the most intense form of human relationship. I think a lot of people think that marriage is just like another form of relationship on the relationship continuum, right? Like if you have like over here, you have, coworkers like are on the far right, like, hey, we're friends, we're acquaintances, and over, then you have like, maybe family relationships or best friends and then, a mother and son and, whatever it may be. Then you have over here, like the strongest human relationship is marriage. People think that it's like on the continuum, it's the strongest form of human relationship. Honestly, that's not true. I would say that marriage isn't even a relationship at all. It intersects with relationship and romance and passion and all the things that come with marriage. But marriage, like as a noun, is a covenant. It's a covenant between two people built on love and faithfulness that catechizes the culture toward Christ. And so we got to think about, you don't become one in a relationship with anyone. So like, just think about that for a second. If it is a relationship, there's no other relationships that you become one, like marriage. I become one with my wife. You don't become one with your best friend. You don't become one with your father or mother or your brother or sister. And again, so it has characteristics of relationship, but marriage in and of itself isn't even in the relationship category. It's something completely different. It is a covenant where two become one. And so just that's kind of an offshoot understanding of giving you some basics of what that means. In his book, The Momentary Marriage, John Piper writes, quote, "The ultimate thing we can say about marriage is that it exists for God's glory. That is, it exists to display God. Marriage is not mainly about being or staying in love. It's mainly about telling the truth with our lives. It's about portraying something true about Jesus Christ and the way he relates to his people. It's about showing in real life the glory of the gospel," end quote. So yes, marriage intersects with relationship and sex and companionship and family, but its central purpose is to show the world how a man's love will prevent him from leaving his wife, and how Christ's love will prevent him from leaving his church. So it's this covenant relationship, and it's demonstrating that for your children to show the commitment, the oneness that is occurring inside of marriage for the procreation of children, for the furthering of the gospel, for the fruitfulness that's commanded in the dominion mandate in Genesis chapter 3. And so it's also showing how a woman will submit to her husband in all things as the church submits to Christ in all things. Marriage essentially is God's memoir to the world. And we should, as a result, protect it at all costs, because we live in a time where it's absolutely being distorted at every possible level.